Okay, thank you all for coming today. Really appreciate it. Just to kick off, we're just going to do some introductions. I've asked Eric Masters from the Broadland and Fakenham constituency to come here today because I know some of you will be living just across the border in the Broadland and Fakenham constituency. It's hard to keep track of who's in which constituency at the minute because all the boundaries have changed for this election. If you're not sure, you can go onto the Reform UK website, look for Find My PPC, which stands for Prospective Parliamentary Candidate, look for Eastern Region, Norfolk, and then when you find your candidate, or when you find your region, then it'll have a little map on there, which will help you figure out which one you're in, until the government updates their website where you can put your postcode in and find out for sure. If that's not working for you, you can go on to type into Google Boundary Commission Final Changes 2024, and that'll bring up a map, an interactive map, where you can figure out exactly which constituency you're in. But most of you, if you're close to Lyng, you'll either be in Mid Norfolk or Broadland and Fakenham. So I'm going to hand over to Eric, who's going to introduce himself, and then we'll get into the presentation.
Right, thank you, Kabeer. I apologise for my look, but this morning I've been car booting with a market stall in North Norwich with the Norwich North candidate, and it went on a bit longer than I anticipated, so I had to rush from there to here. As Kabeer says, the boundaries do get a bit blurred, but I don't want to talk really about me. What I really want to say to you is how proud us other candidates are of Kabeer. This man has worked very, very hard over the last 12, 18 months. Some of us have come a bit later, but he is a true believer in what he says, and he stands up for what he wants. So I'm not here to turn around and tell you lots of stories and all the rest. I want you to know about this man, not me. But I will just say one little thing. This morning, we did this market stall at, you'll have to excuse me, the last 3 weeks I've spoken to, God knows how many hundreds of people. We did this market stall, and you would never believe how many people were walking past this very large car boot, and all they did was kept going, thumbs up. The groundswell of people who are going to vote for reform is going to surprise the main parties. And that's all I have to say. Kabeer, you're a great guy. Thank you very much for standing, and over to you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you. That's very kind of you to say so. And Eric, same for yourself. You've been a great guide with your experience. I've learned a lot from you and really appreciate how you've helped me on this journey as well. Right, okay, so I am just going to quickly give you a little bit of background about myself. Before we do that, just to obviously, if anybody does have any questions, please try and keep them to the end. Obviously, there's a lot to go through. I want to try and cover all the different areas that you're interested in. And so if we have questions in the middle, it'll really, extend the whole thing. So try and keep your questions to the end. And obviously, I will be here till 5 o'clock if necessary to get all those questions answered. Right, okay, so who am I? So I am Kabeer Khar. Obviously, I was born in Northern Ireland, grew up there, went to university in Glasgow, and then got my first job in London, working for British Telecom. I ran my family business for several years, set up my own business during that time as well. At university, I studied international business, economics. I did an MBA. I did a year in France where I studied international relations. I have been obsessed with politics from a very young age. I was definitely a bit of a geek in school, and certainly since the age of 16, I've been obsessed with, particularly Europe, but all the other parts of politics as well. And that's what has brought me here to you today. we moved to Norfolk in 2015. My wife is very keen for all of you to know that she's local, even though I'm not quite yet local. 9 years is not enough. But my wife and her family have been in Norfolk and for many, many years, and my wife went to school here. So that's why we moved here, obviously childcare reasons. I've been in financial services since we moved here, and that's me. So why am I standing for Parliament? Well, the last straw for me was when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, and his very first act as Prime Minister was to ban the use of shale gas in the middle of the worst energy crisis this country has seen since the 1970s. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I thought, clearly these people have no understanding what's going on in the world. They've no understanding about energy security, food security, or any of the things that are important to me. And so that's why I'm doing this. So I've stuck my head above the parapet. I'm going to be honest with you, I was a bit nervous at first about how people would react. You know, there's so much in the media about how Reform UK is such a far-right party and how terrible we are. I cannot tell you the amount of enthusiasm and support I've had on the ground. It's been incredible. There's been so much support everywhere we go. I've had very little negative feedback at all. And as that positivity has come in, it's just energized me further. And we've really ramped up over the last month in terms of our coverage of Mid Norfolk. So the campaign's going really well. There is a lot of support out there, and now I'm just going to go through a little bit of the detail behind what we stand for. Okay, so we're really in the era of crisis. You know, people talk about the highest taxes, the government spending, inflation. I mean, you know all this. I don't need to go into that too much detail. What I would say is, you know, our friend Klaus Schwab and his friends, they're very interested in government control. You know, who are these people? What do they stand for? They want more and more government control. They want more and more taxation. They want more and more control over our lives and how they're led. And I think that is the antithesis of democracy. It goes against freedom. Very much goes against what we stand for in this country. But that is the movement that we've seen over the last number of years. And every crisis has led to more government spending, more government intervention. And it's brought us to where we are today, where the government is trying to run every part of our lives and fail miserably. And really it's about a loss of trust. I mean, for me and my generation, the moment we realised we couldn't trust the government was the Iraq War, and the lies were told over that. We lost trust in banking over the financial crisis. We lost trust in Europe over the sovereign debt crisis and the migration crisis. And a lot of us lost trust in our MPs during the Brexit crisis. And since then, these crises just keep happening more and more frequently with less time in between. And really, it's about, you know, why are we here? What is causing this? And what's next? So, you know, everyone I speak to is worried that there's going to be another conflict in Europe. It's going to expand from the one we already have. Everybody's worried about a debt crisis because of the amount of debt, or possibly a currency crisis if we keep printing money. So I just want to talk a little bit about why we're here and have we seen this pattern before. One of my favourite books is a book called The Fourth Turning. If you've ever heard of him, Neil Howe's demographer, he's gone back over 100 years of history. And what he's found is that these cycles do repeat. Every 80 to 100 years we have these cycles, and within those 80 to 100 years, the demographics are very similar in terms of the characteristics of those demographics. And so this can be summed up not quite nicely by, there's an old saying, which is, hard times create strong men create good times to create weak men create hard times. And you can easily guess which period we're in. So the reason for me talking about this is to give you hope, because if we've been here before, if this is a cycle that has repeated before, and we got out of it before, then we can get out of it again. And the question is, how do we get out of this cycle? How do we move from the fourth turning to the first turning, where we get back to trust in our institutions, trust in our government, and having faith in the people that we elect? Well, we believe that it starts with trust in the national institutions. We're big proponents of proportional representation. If you look back over those periods of conflict over the last 80 to 100 years, and you can go back in history, it usually coincides with the change in the way our constitution works. If you think back to the last fourth turning between the First World War and Second World War, that's when we had the Parliament Act 1911, which changed a lot of the voting, brought, when votes for women, brought for people all the way down to 18. So we've changed our constitution massively during these periods of crisis, and I think that's what's going to be happening next. And the challenge for Reform UK is to set the agenda and say, what is the new constitution going to look like? And we think proportional representation is really important. I believe that one of the biggest problems with the two-party system is that when you're trying to be a broad church, like the Conservatives and Labourers are trying to be, you're appealing to too many different people and you're putting on different faces for different people, and that's how you end up tied up in knots and not knowing what you really stand for. In a PR system, each party can stand up for what they truly believe in, go into government, and then form a government to put forward an agenda. And I think that will bring back a lot of trust. Second thing, House of Lords reform. The House of Lords is now stuffed full of party donors. That is one of the main ways that people get peerages into the House of Lords. There's still hereditary peers in there, and there's a lot of failed MPs who were voted out and then get peerages so that they can continue on with their salaries. I think we need to change that. Now, Reform UK don't have a specific policy on what that needs to look like. Personally, I think it should still be elected, but without party politics. I think it should be elected people from industry, healthcare, manufacturing, agriculture, all the different parts of the economy that give us the funds that we need to run our public services, but without the party politics. I think that way you don't lose the primacy of the Commons and it doesn't upset the system too much. Obviously, withdrawal of the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, is a huge part of why people are voting for us, and I 100% behind that. But with a British Bill of Rights to make sure that the rights of British people are protected, okay? I don't believe the ECHR has protected us nearly as much as it should have. It didn't stop us being locked down during the pandemic. It didn't stop Tony Blair locking people up for 90 days without trial. It didn't stop internship in the 1980s. And actually in those areas, we could strengthen human rights for people that are from this country. But it shouldn't, what the ECHR has brought for asylum seekers is the right to a family life. And that right to a family life is what all of the immigration lawyers are using to get these asylum seekers to be able to stay even after their claims have been rejected. So that's why we need to withdraw from the ECHR, but we are mindful of human rights that need to be protected. I do think turbocharging economic growth will make a big difference. Obviously, it makes a difference to people, and that will give them the trust that they need. And that starts by focusing on ordinary people, not corporatism. So we are very much focused on the working man and woman, and not the multinational corporations. Okay, the most common question I get asked online, and sometimes on the doorstep, is how are you going to pay for your promises? Okay, so what I've tried to do here is just highlight the biggest four areas for where we can make savings in government, because we do have a lot of problems. We are really looking to reform the way things are done in this country, and so we do need to make some big savings in order to achieve those things. Where are those savings going to come from? Number one, cancel net zero. Okay, net zero, I mean, I used to be quite apathetic about climate change. I thought the climate always changes. I wasn't really too sure about net zero. And then when I really started to dig into it, started to find out that these figures that the government have quoted are wildly inaccurate. What they're spending now on net zero today is £30 billion a year. And that is projected to rise to £50 billion a year, according to the Climate Change Committee. Now, let me just give you one example, because it's really tactical where these costs come from. But one example is this. We're currently building the world's largest wind farm off the coast of Norfolk in the North Sea. And because that wind farm is so large, and because the power from wind is so variable, a city the size of Norwich cannot cope with that much variability in power. So they have to send the power to London, but to do that, they have to build the Norwich to Tilbury line, which is costing £7.5 billion to connect this wind farm to London. This is just one part of a project nationwide that's connecting all the wind farms to the cities, and the total cost for that is £56 billion. Now, you can read that in the Telegraph yourself. I actually heard that figure a week before it was public because one of my clients is very senior in the National Grid, and I asked him point blank. That is an absolute true figure, £56 billion just to connect the wind farms, okay? There's so many other ways which net zero is going to cost us, which we'll come into later. The second way we can save money is stop paying interest on QE reserves. Now, I have to be honest, I mean, I've studied economics, but even Richard Tice, he had on this one because I had not heard about this until Richard Tice raised this. What's happening is, what is QE? Okay, QE is money printing, okay? That is the money that we printed to save the banks in 2008. It's the money we printed to save the financial system during COVID, okay? So all that money is propping up the banks. But guess what? We're paying them interest on those bonds, okay? And because those bonds are inflation linked, index linked, the cost of those bonds goes up every time our interest rates go up. So the cost was negligible when interest rates were at all-time lows, but now interest rates have risen. We're paying 34 to 40 billion pounds a year, and that is going to double if Labour get into power and start money printing like crazy. So we say that we should not be paying interest on those reserves that are for stabilisation of banks. The ECB is already doing this. They've called it tiered reserves, where they say when they've printed the money, we don't pay interest on it. That is going to save 30 to 40 billion pounds a year today, but in the future it could be much, much more, depending on how much Labour spend. Okay, the third way we could save money is foreign aid. Now, I've got to admit, I'm a bit of a hawk on foreign aid. Our party policy is to cut it by 50%. I think we should cut it completely. And the reason is this. Now, it's not that I'm against charities. Ask anyone who knows me. When I was finished university, I went off to India, spent a summer working for an NGO charity, teaching kids in the slums of Delhi, and it was the best thing I ever did. It was hugely rewarding, and I'm a great believer in charity. But charity, I believe, is a private decision, okay? The government is there for market failures when private citizens cannot fulfill what needs to be done, okay? The government is not there to just decide, oh, hang on, let's just take 12 billion of taxpayers' money and spend it how we want to spend it. That's not what government is for. We have no control or knowledge or transparency over how this money's been spent or where it's been spent. But our party policy is to cut it by 50%, and that would save £6 billion a year. We're not a rich country, okay? It really annoys me when I hear people say, we're the 6th richest country in the world. Okay, we are not. We are the 6th largest economy in the world, okay? The 2nd largest economy in the world is China. It's not a rich country. The 4th or the 5th is India. That's not a rich country, okay, on a per person basis. Okay, so we are the 27th richest country in the world per person. We should not be trotting around the world trying to tell people what's up and what's down and trying to fund whatever with taxpayers' money. Okay, the government, the exchequer is not rich, it's not wealthy. There's a 5% deficit, the debt's at 100% of GDP. We have to look after this country and get this budget under control before we can think about that. And fourthly, cutting bureaucracy. Now, every government that comes to power says, well, we're going to cut waste in the civil service, and often they have failed. But we have a unique opportunity right now with artificial intelligence, digitization, and even things like blockchain technology. We can totally revolutionize the way administration is done, and that can save an absolute fortune. And that's one of the ways we'll get 5% savings in each government department, and that's in our manifesto. Simplifying the tax code. Our tax code is 21,000 pages. Somewhere like Hong Kong, the tax code is 500 pages. There's absolutely no need for our tax code to be this long. It adds huge bureaucracy for business as well as government, and that's something we believe needs to change. Okay, so there will be handouts later. I've got a friend coming who's been printing them off this morning, so if you want to see a bit more detail on this, you'll get a handout with the manifesto, and you'll see some of the detail there, which you can go through in your own time. So why are we doing these savings? Well, we want to cut taxes in order to create the economic growth we need. Cutting taxes does create growth, and it will grow the pie, and there'll be more money for public services, but it takes time. So we have to cut in the short term to make it possible to cut these taxes, and then with the tax cuts, you can grow the economy, okay? So we propose to lift the basic rate tax to 20,000 and the higher rate tax to 70,000. Now, what will that do? It means pensioners won't be paying any tax. It means veterans won't be paying any tax. It means many people who are in a benefits trap that it doesn't pay them to go to work, excuse me, will suddenly find they could. So it will pay people to go to work, and a lot of that money will come back into the economy, either in the form of VAT receipts or just the multiplier effect. The multiplier effect means you give more money to people, they spend it in the economy, and if you're giving it to local people, ordinary people, they're spending it in their community, they're not spending it on a tax haven. So that's the way to create economic growth. Outside of the EU, we can scrap VAT on energy bills. The Conservatives refuse to do it. I don't know why. You'd have to ask them. Is it because they want to keep us closely aligned with Europe? I don't know. Stamp duty, I mean, I work in the property industry and mortgage advice, and I can tell you now, every single person that moves house, the first thing they do is they want to put a new floor in, they want to put a new kitchen, but the stamp duty bill really holds a lot of people back from moving, and it kind of gums up the property market. If we lower that burden, more people will move, we'll get a lot of that money back in VAT receipts as people renovate their properties. Now, cutting business taxes is one of the most important things, in my view, because business is the lifeblood of the economy, particularly small businesses. So we would propose to cut corporation tax from 25% to 20%, and then eventually to 15%. Now, history shows that this will actually raise money. Now, how do we know that? Well, the coalition government in 2010 reduced corporation tax from 28% down to 19%. The corporation tax receipts actually went up, they never went down. If you look at the Republic of Ireland, it's 12.5%, and they raise 3 times as much as we do from corporation tax on a per person basis. So it's not always the case that if you raise the tax rate, you raise more money. The Laffer curve shows you that sometimes if you cut a tax, you can actually raise more money, depending on where you are in the curve. And just to show you that that doesn't mean that the Republic of Ireland has lots of debt. In fact, their debt to GDP is down to 40%, where ours is up at 100%. So tax cutting has been shown to work, and it will create the growth that we need. Now, I'm going to give Rishi Sunak some credit here. He came up with a really good idea called the super deduction. What it meant was that companies that invest in machinery and in expansion got fully expensed that for tax purposes. And that encouraged a lot of investment. And then as that happened, you saw a massive boom in investment in Britain. Of course, being a good idea, Rishi Sunak obviously scrapped it. So we don't have the super deduction anymore. But that's something that I think we should look at. It's not currently in the manifesto, but cutting corporation tax goes a long way towards that. Is there anybody in the room who's IR35? Before I spend any time on that, you are? Okay. So just without getting into all the details, we think it's an abomination, and we would scrap IR35 completely. Any small business owners in the room who pay VAT? Okay. So we would lift the VAT threshold to 120,000, again, massively cutting red tape for many people. It's a specific rule that was brought in for contractors, so specific types of self-employed people, usually IT consultants and people like that. It's a rule that meant that they're taking risks, and like any business is taking a risk, they don't have the security of employment, but now the government is taxing them like they're employees, so they don't get any reward for the risks that they're taking, which is just wrong. Now, we would pay for some of this with a 4% online delivery tax, but that only applies to the multinational enterprises. So that would go a long way towards funding that. And we would scrap business rates for small business, okay? When I had my business, one of the biggest factors that helped me decide which location I was going to, so I opened a gourmet burger restaurant, okay? Burgers are a passion of mine, and I always wanted to have one. And I had to decide between a town called Coleraine, where there was a great location, loads of through traffic, but the rates were 30 grand a year. Another one in a town called Portstewart, the rates were £4,000 a year. I ended up going for the one where there was £4,000 a year. And really, in hindsight, I probably regret that. But the business rates was the biggest reason I took that decision. When you're running a business, you can renegotiate your rents, you can decide how many people you employ, you can negotiate with suppliers and choose what products, but you cannot negotiate your business rates. Once you've got your premises, that's it. It's a massive killer for small businesses, and it's one of the reasons why our high streets are so empty. And obviously charity shops don't pay business rates, and that's again one of the reasons why some of those shops are now filled with charity shops, because they don't have to pay the rates. Okay, inheritance tax. The thing about inheritance tax is rich people don't pay inheritance tax, okay? It's designed to make rich people pay and make a bigger contribution, but they don't pay it, okay? They've got trusts, they've got family investment companies, they've got self-invested personal pensions, they've got SASs, and all of those vehicles are free of inheritance tax. So anyone who is wealthy and can afford a financial advisor will shelter all of their assets from inheritance tax. So who pays inheritance tax? The only people that pay it are the people that are wealthy and didn't plan, or, elderly people who are asset rich. Maybe their house went up through no fault of their own, but they're not income rich and they can't afford these expensive advisors, and then they get caught in this inheritance tax. So it's completely unfair the way it's been administered. We would raise the threshold to 2 million. We've got one of the highest inheritance tax rates in the world, and it's just not fair, because that is income that people, it's wealth that people have already paid tax on. It's after tax income that has built up their wealth, and then we're taxing it again when they die. Okay, now red tape is obviously a huge problem. One of the reasons we voted to come out of the EU was just the ever expanding red tape. And so we very much believe in reforming all parts of government in order to cut red tape. The planning system, I know from developers, friends of mine like Alex, who have to go through this process. It's unbelievable, the different reports that people have to come up with, pages and pages of stuff which very often is not even being read. It's not even being digested. It's just tick box, tick box, tick box. And it's adding huge complexity to the planning system. And I would argue when you get that kind of complexity, what you end up with is bad decision making. And what we've seen in Attleborough is really bad decision making, where they've built a development on a floodplain, and it's caused my mother and her family to be flooded out of their home in Attleborough. So what we want is better, more efficient decision making, and sometimes that means reducing complexity. The tax code I've already mentioned. Any landlords in the room? So one of the biggest things for landlords is since about 2016, George Osborne had really launched the attack on landlords with all the changes he's made. He's obviously raised massively the taxes on the income that they get if it's not an unlimited company. He's raised massively the stamp duty. And now Michael Gove has brought in a number of changes to make it harder for landlords to evict tenants. And what has been the result? Well, rents have gone through the roof. At the end of the day, if you want less of something, you tax it. If you want people to drink less alcohol, you tax it. Cigarettes, sugary drinks, whatever it is, if we want less of it, we tax it. Okay? If you want fewer places to rent, then tax landlords. And then when there's fewer places to rent, the rents go through the roof. That is not how the market works, okay? Scotland's finding this out the hard way, where they tried to control rents, and they've gone absolutely through the roof. What we need is to repeal all of those changes, bring back a market so that landlords can easily rent to people without fear of losing their property to a nightmare tenant. And then you'll have more landlords coming back into the market, which will bring rents down. And that is one of the biggest challenges for people at the minute who don't own a home. Immigration. Okay, so 2022, I just want to clarify for people the difference between immigration and net migration. Not everyone understands it. Immigration is obviously the people coming in. Net migration is immigration minus the people leaving, okay? So when we talk about net migration, that's the balance between the two. So net migration in 22 was 745,000. Obviously in 2023 is nearly 700,000 again. It's basically 2 million over the last 3 years, which is incredible, absolutely beyond any record we've ever had before. And what we've seen during that period is, on a per person basis, the longest recession in this country's history. We need time to absorb this wave of immigration, okay? We cannot have 2 million people coming in 3 years and expect to have the infrastructure and housing for them. It's just not possible. So our policy is for net zero migration, and we need to get our infrastructure up to scratch. You can see the correlation in the figures. So if you see on the bars, you can see the GDP per person, so that's income per person, falling as net migration, which used to be negative. I didn't even know that until I got this graph in the 70s, and it's obviously gone way higher than 300,000. So this graph is, wildly out of date, but it just goes to show that the correlation between net migration going up and GDP per person coming down, and it stands to reason. More people puts pressure on housing and drives wages down as well. So it's not helping. Yes, it increases total GDP. And the news, they're obsessed with GDP. As soon as there's GDP of 0.1% growth, it's breaking news, GDP's gone up, right? Who cares? Nobody cares, right? What you care about is what you've got left at the end of the month after your mortgage, your council tax, your electric bills, okay? So we need to stop being focused on GDP, which can be very easily manipulated with huge immigration, and instead focus on disposable income. How much money have you got at the end of the month, okay? And you'll see this all over the media. The propaganda is, from the Treasury, is all focused on GDP, but when you look at it on per person, it's basically been almost flat since 2008. Okay, now it's not just Nigel Farage saying this anymore, okay? He's been saying it for years, but now the chief economist of the Bank of England agrees that the main driver for rents going up has been the massive increase in net migration. Okay, so obviously we've covered the first 2 points there already. We believe in smart migration, okay? So net zero, if there's 500,000 people leaving every year, there will still be room for people to come, okay? If we need doctors, if we need dentists, if we need specialist people, okay? There will still be a lot of flux in the labour market, but we need to be smart about who's coming in. The vast majority of those people that are leaving are highly skilled, I can promise you that. They're doctors and nurses going to work in private healthcare systems, or they're experienced people going to work in Dubai or America or wherever it is. We need to be replacing like with like and getting the most highly skilled, highly educated people back in to replace them, and that is how we can create smart migration to grow the economy and actually help people. Okay, so stop the boats. Everybody on the other side and the other parties will tell you that this can't be done, but they said the same thing to Australia, and Australia did exactly the same thing. They'll say, oh no, you need an agreement with France, you can't stop the boats in the channel and take them back. Well, actually, Article 33 of the UN Convention on Maritime Law says that we can. That's exactly what Australia did. That's how they stopped the boats and they've solved their crisis. And no one in Australia is talking about going back to the old system. That's exactly what we need to do. And if it means leaving the ECHR, then that's what we need to do. I'm not going to go over all those points, which I've already discussed. But needless to say, I believe the biggest blockage is the civil service. I think there's far too many left-wing people in the civil service that think it's cruel to stop these people trafficking across the channel. I don't know how they come to that conclusion when there's so many people dying in the channel. But we need to create a new border force, recruit people specifically for this purpose so we can get it done. And the quicker we get it done, the quicker people will stop going to the channel to even attempt this. And the French will thank us eventually, because they're the ones that are having to deal with all the camps in Calais. And when that stops, then they will be thankful. Sorry, one of the other things I just wanted to say is that I think a lot of the applications need to happen in embassies. The biggest problem we have at the minute is the only way for a lot of asylum seekers to come in here even legally is to come here illegally. They actually have to come here legally unless they've had a special route set up like Ukraine or Hong Kong did. Actually, if we set up proper process in our embassies around the world, then we can say to people, sorry, you didn't follow the proper process. You could have gone to your embassy. Instead, you've chosen to make this journey, and on the journey, you've lost your papers. That's your fault. You had the opportunity to apply in a neighbouring country where our embassy was, and therefore, we're not going to accept your application. That is the way it should work. And therefore, you can still have some room for people who are genuinely fleeing persecution, whether it's translators from Afghanistan or whoever. You can still have those routes open, but without it being abused. When I looked into the figures of asylum seekers, there's many people coming from Vietnam, there's people coming from Eritrea, there's people coming from Iran. None of those countries are at war. None of them are at war. And I heard recently that the Bishop of Liverpool has recently done 200 conversions to Christianity. 200. And when he was asked, how many of those were not asylum seekers? Not a single one. They were all converting to Christianity so that they could claim that they would be persecuted if they were sent back. So there is flagrant abuse going on of our system. We need to get hold of it and get it fixed. In terms of leaving the ECHR, you know, as I said, we want a bill of rights to protect our rights. I don't think we need to worry. We've been a pioneer of civil rights in this country for centuries. There's many democratic countries around the world who aren't part of the ECHR. Canada, Japan, USA have observer status. Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea are not part of it at all. So you don't need to be democratic and have rights for your people and be part of the ECHR, okay? It's just something the media is trying to push. Okay, so on to health policy. So health as a percentage of GDP has risen. It's gone up a lot. Obviously, lots of that was during COVID, but we are up at 11% of GDP, despite what Fiona Bruce tried to tell Nigel Farage. We're still waiting for that apology. On question time, he got it absolutely right. It's 11% of GDP we spend on health. But obviously GDP, as we've already said, is misleading, okay? The truth is, per person, it's falling because we've had so many, 2 million people come in 3 years that per person, our health spending is falling. Now, I know that a lot of those people are coming are young and maybe they're not all using the health service, but a lot of them are, and if they stay, then they will, you know, use the health service over time. And as I've already said, it doesn't mean we can't let in doctors and nurses, we should, but we should absolutely control the number of people coming. The thing I like most about illegal immigration is if somebody's willing to break the law, like when my grandfather went to Northern Ireland in 1952, and my mother came in 1980, and they didn't break the law, okay? And they both started businesses and contributed to society and integrated. If somebody comes here illegally and they're prepared to break the law to come here, what are they going to be prepared to do when they get here? That's what worries me. So health spending is not as much as we think once you look at it on a per person basis. But health spending in general globally has gone up. And why is that? Okay, we have become a medication nation with a pill for every ill. Okay, there is a massive increase in the number of pharmaceutical products that people are using. A few years ago, I went home for Christmas and my dad brought out this tray of pills, you know, and it was just Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and there was just all these different pills. And in the end, he ended up getting rid of a lot of those because they really weren't doing anything. Once you did the research into these pills, there's very negligible benefits. One of our biggest supporters in Attleborough, I'm not going to mention his name, he's not here, but he has suffered with side effects from statins for a very long time. And he showed me some of the books he's been reading about it. Statins are a massive thing. I listened to a cardiologist called Dr. Asim Malhotra. He became very famous during the pandemic because his father died from a vaccine injury. And he talks about statins. His expertise is cardiology and statins. And the benefits from statins are very, very negligible unless you've had a heart attack. But there are millions of people in Britain today on statins just because their cholesterol went above 5. Okay, and the side effects are hugely damaging. Okay, I've seen my father and what happened to him when he was on statins, and many other people have the same thing. So. Why have we seen this huge increase in pharmaceuticals? Well, I think one of the reasons is our medicines agency, which is called the MHRA, was effectively privatized in the 1980s. In 1986, it went from being publicly funded to now it is 85% funded by the pharmaceutical industry. And they are obviously influencing a lot of the decisions that are made and a lot of the studies that are being conducted. And I think we need to move away to much more nutrition and wellness and a holistic healthcare and stop being so obsessed with drugs. My cousin works for, full disclosure, my cousin does work for a pharmaceutical company. I introduced him to people as a drug dealer. But you know, he agrees with me that there's far too much medication in the industry and it needs to change. So what's our pledge on health? Well, the biggest crime, I think, is the cap on training doctors. 7,500 doctors are trained in this country every year. That's the cap. And there are 30,000 doctors leaving the NHS every year. Most of that's through retirement or early retirement, but some of it's people leaving to go and work abroad. And why are they leaving? Well, they're leaving because they're overwhelmed. Working in the NHS is a nightmare right now for doctors and nurses. It is so difficult for them. And this is not helping, okay? Now, why does the government cap it? Well, they cap it because they think it's too expensive to train the doctors we need. Okay, well, how expensive is it if we train a doctor and they leave and go and work in Australia, okay? So that makes no sense to me. Or if they take early retirement because they're fed up, okay? What we've got is an NHS that is on its knees. The waiting lists are out of control. If we can bring it back under control, it'll actually save money. If we can treat people early, okay, then treating someone late is far more expensive. Okay, again, it's a false economy. They put less money in health thinking, oh, that's going to save us money. It's not. What's going to happen is they're going to languish on waiting lists, their condition's going to worsen, and it's going to be far more expensive to help them in the long run. So we need to drive those waiting lists down by any means necessary. So we're not ideological about it. What we say is the NHS should always be free at the point of use, but where there is capacity in the private sector, we should use it. Where there's capacity in the NHS, use that. But we've got to put all hands on deck to get these waiting lists down. And so we're proposing a 3-year tax cut for doctors and nurses to get them, attract some back who've maybe gone abroad and get people working more hours without paying more tax. And that way we can bring the waiting list down, and then hopefully by then, once we've lifted the cap on doctors, we'll have some more of those too. Okay. So, we believe in a proper investigation into COVID. Okay, the investigation that's happening right now it's like a media stunt. You know, they spend more time talking about politicians who had cake than they do about what happened with lockdowns and whether or not that was a good idea. We believe that lockdowns were a huge mistake. We can see that in the figures from Sweden. Sweden was the last country to lock down. If you remember, I was glued to the TV every day. Some of you may remember, some of you may not. But the scientific advice right at the start of the pandemic was herd immunity. That was what was in the pandemic plan that was already written for a COVID-like pandemic. It said herd immunity is the best way to go. And the Netherlands, Sweden, and the UK were the last to lock down because of that scientific advice, until the pressure from the media changed. The Netherlands and the UK caved, and Sweden Sweden was the last one to cave. They didn't cave. They kept open, and people did shelter, but they were able to use their own judgment. And at the end of the day, when you total up all deaths, excess deaths, Sweden had by far the lowest in the whole of Europe when all said and done. What the left-wing media will tell you is Sweden's COVID deaths were higher, but what they won't tell you is that they didn't have anywhere near as many suicides as we had. They didn't turn their health service into a COVID service and then end up with huge waiting lists in cancer and cardiology and everything else. So we need to learn that lesson, and there needs to be a proper investigation, and if we get into government, we will do it. And there you can see the results. Because when you lock your country down and you have to pay people then to stay at home, and then our debts went from 80% of GDP to 100, while Sweden, their debt to GDP has gone down to 30. And we'll be paying for this for a long, long time. Okay, so moving on to the environment. Now, we do believe in a clean environment, but we don't believe in climate change alarmism, okay? The Environment Agency should have the powers to enforce clean air, particularly near food processing sites, which this is an issue that's particular to Mid Norfolk. In Watton and in Stow-Beedon, Cranswick Foods have some massive food processing sites. They are pumping ammonia into the air, and it's causing misery for the residents that live in those areas. Many of them have contacted me, and I've been out to see them, and I've written to the CEO of Cranswick Foods. But I've had no response so far. Hopefully, if I become the MP for Mid Norfolk, I will have a bit more sway and I will be banging his door down. But when it comes to climate change, okay, that is different. So climate change is something that the scientists have been trying to predict for years. We had, I don't know how many of you will know this, but we had a cooling period. Between 1945 and 1975, 1980, the world was actually getting cooler. And so the scientists were predicting that we were going into a new ice age by the 21st century. Obviously that changed. The New York Times told us that if we didn't have zero carbon by the year 2000, we were going to have an environmental catastrophe as irreversible as a nuclear holocaust. So how have those predictions turned out? Yeah, not great for those people. Here's some of the contradictory reports. So in 2011, we're told climate change making birds get bigger. 2019, it's making birds get smaller. Okay, so this is the nonsense that's in our media. Now, I met my wife in a flat in Clapham in London where we live together, and she denies this actually, which surprises me. But she bought me the video, The Inconvenient Truth, because she wanted to convince me of the dangers of climate change. So that was the last argument I won in our relationship. Yeah, let's have a look at some of the predictions that were made. Within a decade, there'll be no more snows on Mount Kilimanjaro. Not happened. Hurricanes would get stronger. USA haven't had a Category 3 hurricane since Hurricane Katrina, 2005. And the North Pole would be free of ice in some of the summer months by 2013, and it's nowhere near. Okay, so these predictions of doom have been around for a long, long time, and they're not coming true. What is happening? Climate-related deaths are falling, and they're falling dramatically. Why are they falling? Because the world is getting richer as we open up free trade and the third world develops. Climate change deaths are falling. And by the way, cold kills a lot more people than heat. Okay, in Europe, it's 10 times. Even in hot countries like India, it's 8 times as many deaths from cold. And in the UK, it's 20 times as many people die from cold than die from the cold, than die from the heat. So climate change is not an emergency, okay? Then we were told, oh, it's going to affect global food production. So what's happened? We can track global food production and global land use. Even though the land use has been decreasing since the early 2000s, global food production is still rising, okay? Despite the fact that CO2 has been going through the roof for the last 120 years, and the crop yields have been doing the exact same thing. So we are being spun a yarn here. Anyone who has done biology, even as a 12-year-old, knows that CO2 is plant food, okay? And so what have we, I mean, we use this in greenhouses, for God's sakes, to actually make our plants grow faster. And so NASA will tell you themselves that we've seen global greening of 15% since the year 2000 because of the increased CO2. The planet is in a cycle. Who knew? Then we had, 10 years ago, David Attenborough told us that the Great Barrier Reef was going to completely collapse because of climate change. And what has happened since? We're at the highest level of Great Barrier Reef since records began in 1986. Polar bears, turned out the reason polar bears are down is actually hunting. And when we banned hunting, the polar bear population started rising again. Another yarn. And then the biggest lie of all is the 97% lie, okay? So anytime you get into debate with anyone about climate change, they say, 97% of scientists agree that climate change is a crisis, okay? That is a lie, okay? What do 97% of scientists agree? They agree that global warming is real, that climate change is real, and that humans are partially causing it. That's what 97% of scientists agree. When you ask them, does that mean we're facing a climate crisis? There is no available study that surveys scientists who ask them if that is causing a crisis. It does not exist. These are some of the most eminent scientists in the world. Okay, Richard Lindzen on the IPCC. You've got Nobel Prize winners there. You've got people from Harvard, from MIT. They all say that climate change is not a crisis. Steve Koonin is the one I like the most because he was the climate advisor for Barack Obama. There you go. So, all of this is available on YouTube, or you can buy their books on Amazon and you can read it for yourself, okay? Judith Curry was actually, so you'll hear people say, but it's not about global warming. They changed it to climate change because what's happening now is you've got people saying, well, it's going to create more hurricanes, tornadoes, more extreme weather, okay? And the reason they say that was a report from this lady, Judith Curry, okay? And she brought out a report that said that as the planet got warmer, there was going to be more extreme weather. Now, any good scientist puts their paper through the peer review process. And once she did that, someone pointed out to her that her data set changed to measurement in 1986. And that was the reason for her conclusions. So she went back and retracted her conclusions. What happened to her? She was thrown off the IPCC because she went against the narrative. Okay, Robert Lindzen, the exact same thing. Harvard, MIT, thrown off the IPCC for telling them that climate change is not a crisis. These are the most credible scientists in the world. You can watch their videos online, you can read their books. Okay, this is all available information. And it's not just the scientists, Greenpeace activists. Okay, Patrick Moore, one of the founders of Greenpeace in the 70s in Canada, says environmentalists are waking up to a climate scam. Dr. David Bellamy, remember him from about 15, 20 years ago, used to be on the BBC. Guess what? They threw him off. He's not allowed in the BBC anymore because he says global warming is part of a natural cycle and there's nothing we can actually do to stop it. Okay? So, CO2 emissions, right. How does this affect us, right? The agenda that they've said is the solution is renewables, okay? Here's another lie you'll hear, okay? So, all these climate guys say, renewable energy, they're going to save us. And there's 4 countries in the world who are completely reliant on renewables. They don't need anything else. They can do it, we can do it. Okay, when you actually drill deep and find out what's going on, who are these countries and why? Number 1, Iceland. Iceland is a volcanic island. They're doing it through geothermal activity. We don't have that, okay? Norway, they're doing it through hydro. Why are they doing it through hydro? Well, they've got fjords, which have 2 inlets. Our locks and have 5 or 6. It makes them completely uneconomic for hydroelectric. That's why Norway is self-sufficient on hydro. Costa Rica, Paraguay, these countries are all burning timber, okay? They're cutting down forests and they're burning it for their electricity, and they say that that's renewable because the trees will grow back in 30, 40 years' time, and that will save the planet, okay? Well, once you actually account for the lost photosynthesis for those trees, chopping down wood is worse than coal for CO2. So none of this makes any sense. And the countries with the most solar and wind have the most expensive electricity. The countries with the least, who are using nuclear, France and Sweden, they have reasonable cost of electricity, or in France's case, quite low cost. Okay, and you can see the result on Germany's industrial output. Since they started closing down their nuclear power stations, their industrial output has collapsed. Ever since 2016, their car industry has peaked in 2016, it's been falling ever since, and that is largely to do with how they're getting their energy. Same thing in America, California, New York, where all the renewable energy is. They have the most expensive energy costs in the US. Obviously, solar farms are a great solution if you think there's going to be extreme weather. Yeah. So, yeah, okay. And this is what I was telling you earlier about the National Grid project, Norwich to Tilbury line, etc., etc. Oh, they need to electrify the railways as well, which I guess we wanted anyway, 31 billion, but they'll do that for climate change, not for us. This is the net zero plan. I don't expect you to be able to read it. It's on my website if you want to take a closer look. I've picked out some highlights just to give you an idea of how these people think. Electric planes, yes, they're going to save us, electric planes. First prize for any of you that get on an electric plane. I won't be the first. Yeah, let's see. I don't need to say anything about that. They're going to close all airports except Heathrow, Glasgow and Belfast by 2030. Not going to happen. They're going to end all shipping by 2050, okay? But we don't have food security. We're not going to pay our farmers to produce food. We're going to pay them to rewild, but then we won't be able to ship any food. Does any of this make sense? We're going to phase out mortar, concrete and virgin steel, which cannot be made without using fossil fuels. You need coke from coal to make steel. You cannot do it and hit net zero. And they're going to ship all that off. So what's going to happen is we're basically going to become a museum. And we're going to import all our foods. We're going to become a nation of estate agents and charity shops, and everything will be manufactured and imported from abroad, where they can do all the CO2 emissions they like. And if you think you're waiting long for an ambulance now, wait till your ambulance is electric. Let's see how long you have to wait then. Here's another one for the ECHR. The ECHR, European Court of Human Rights, recently ruled that the Swiss government didn't do enough to basically stop these poor women from having their house being too hot. And so they've now sanctioned the Swiss government. And so now the Swiss are talking about leaving the European Court of Human Rights because they have gone well beyond being a court, and now they're trying to drive policy. I don't know if any of them heard of air conditioning. Maybe that doesn't translate. And of course, now the Germans want to stop driving on the weekends, but somebody was talking about Animal Farm earlier, or was it was it Animal Farm? So if you've read George Orwell, Animal Farm obviously goes through this whole process. It's all about the Russian Revolution, and in the end, the pigs who take over the farm end up standing on two legs, if you'll know what I'm talking about if you've read it. But here are the pigs basically coming out of their private jet into their Range Rover, telling us that we have to stop the work. So why is nuclear such a good option? The answer is energy density. The energy density of uranium is 76 million times better than coal or even fuel, ordinary oil. It's unbelievable. If aliens arrived on this planet and they realized that we had nuclear and didn't roll it out, they would be absolutely astounded, okay? 200 of these wind turbines is the same power output as one of these small modular reactors, okay? It's incredible. We do not need to rip up our countryside in the name of climate change. We can have nuclear, which is clean. It will reduce pollution. It's reliable. We won't be praying for wind or sunshine, and our industry will be able to survive. The French did it. When did they do it? So 1973, the last energy crisis, when obviously the Shah of Iran and all that was happening in the Gulf. And what happened, we were lucky, we discovered North Sea oil. The French didn't have that luck, so they decided that they would go fully energy independent with nuclear. and they did it in 15 years. They built 56 nuclear reactors, and now they are supplying us when the wind doesn't blow, which is great. But what happens if, I don't know, the Russians or the Chinese decide to sabotage that connection? What are we going to do when the wind doesn't blow? Is that so fanciful that that would happen after it happened to Germany? I don't think so. But here we are. And when you actually look at CO2 per kilowatt hour, again, Sweden, France, Norway, who use nuclear and hydro, have way, way less CO2 per kilowatt hour. The Danes and the Germans, many, many, many more times CO2 per kilowatt hour. So you really have to question the logic in wind and solar. Fine for your house, listen, no objection. You want to put it on your house, great, top up the grid. If you want wind turbines in your factory, great. But we cannot have a national grid that depends on it. Okay, the national grid has to be there. If you've got solar panels, the national grid needs to be there for when your energy is not there, and same for wind. Okay, so that's all ready there. You know, there are good ideas. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. There's a new technology called small modular reactors. Okay, so this takes the technology that we've used in our nuclear submarines for decades, which you've heard about Trident, obviously the 4 submarines which sail around the world, and they can do that because they've got these very, very small nuclear reactors on board. Taking that technology and using it for power plants around the UK would be a great solution, and because they're smaller, they can be mass produced, which will bring down the cost, and it's easier to get planning permission, and that's what it's all about, trying to reduce the cost of living, and if we can do it with clean energy, all the better. Okay, and the best bit is that the pioneers in small modular reactors are actually British companies. Rolls-Royce in Derby and Forgemasters in Sheffield are at the forefront of this technology. Unfortunately, Rishi Sunak isn't given the subsidies that he's given the wind industry, so they've decided that they'll have to go to Poland to experiment with this technology instead of rolling it out and creating really well-paid jobs here in the UK. So obviously we would go full speed ahead with nuclear. Once small modular reactors are fully developed, we would do that. Shale gas is the other one. Shale gas is the natural gas that's onshore, okay, as opposed to offshore. We've got 50 years of shale gas in this country. We can absolutely pay for the nuclear rollout with the profits we make from shale gas. And by the time it runs out, we will have complete energy independence through nuclear. Instead, and this was, as I said to you right at the start of this presentation, the day I joined the Conservatives was the day he banned shale gas. What he did the following weeks was sign a deal with America and Qatar to ship LNG. Okay, so what is LNG? LNG is when you take shale gas from America, okay, you freeze it into a liquid form, you put it on a tanker, you sail it across the ocean, and then you heat it up to regasify it and put it into our pipes. Okay. Now the BBC analysis is that the CO2 from that is 10 times the CO2 as our own domestic natural gas. But guess what? Our CO2 emissions for the UK have reduced because we're importing it. Okay, so we're not helping the planet at all. What we're doing is playing a little game so that Rishi Sunak can look good in Davos with all his friends when he tells them how much we've reduced CO2 by, okay? Lower energy, listen, energy is the bedrock. I've spent a lot of time in energy, I know that. It's really something I'm really passionate about. But studying economics, I know for a fact, energy is the bedrock of Western civilization, okay? There is no coincidence that our industrial revolution happened when we discovered how to make use of oil and coal, okay? That is what led to the industrial revolution. It's led to our way of life. If we destroy that, we will destroy Western civilization. That's my belief. Lower energy costs equal lower inflation. Lower inflation brings lower interest rates. Lower interest rates, more investment, more money in people's pockets, more investment, more economic growth, okay? And then with the economic growth, we get the public services and the welfare state that we want, okay? Policing, okay, so 40,000 new police officers. I think really, like I can go through all these stats, but really What we're talking about is a new approach to policing. There is far too many pet projects right now that are being forced onto the police. Okay, if any of you here, is anybody here a policeman or works in the police or used to work in the police? What they're facing in terms of administration, in terms of diversity quotas, and in terms of trying to do police social media is incredible. It's a total waste of time. We need to just get back to some old-fashioned policing of locking the bad guys up. I mean, really, it's that simple. There needs to be much more priority on street crime and less on social media. Stop and search, as Nigel said during the BBC debate, if you watched it, we shouldn't be squeamish about which areas have more ethnic minorities if we're doing more stop and search there. The key thing is, where is the crime? That's where we do the stop and search. What happened to treating people on the content of their character instead of the colour of their skin? I mean, that was a dream once. Could we go back to that? And then we could stop being so sniffy about if this area has more ethnic minorities than another. It doesn't matter. All that matters and all that anyone cares about is where is the crime committed, And to say that it's racist, well, I don't see the police targeting Chinese people. I don't see them targeting other communities, so it's nothing to do with race. Okay, what it's about is going after the areas where the crime is. That's how you get it done, and we won't be afraid to do any of that. Of course, if you do lock a lot more people up, you need somewhere to put them, and unfortunately, this government has totally failed to expand prison places, largely because they've they've looked at, thankfully they've not done it yet, they're trying to privatise the prison system. If any of you have seen any documentaries about how this works in America, it's utterly shocking. There's absolutely no rehabilitation at all. It's something that I am very much against, and I'm a free marketeer, but privatising the prisons is not the way to go. We need to invest in the courts. Slow justice is no justice. And if we actually have the capacity to lock more people up, then we will take more crime off the streets. But yes, we do need to look at rehabilitation. And the last point, grooming gangs has been a huge problem. It's really started, in the councils, and I don't like to throw mud, but I think there's been a particular problem in Labour councils where they're much more squeamish about persecuting people from an ethnic minority, and the grooming gangs issue is one of the national embarrassments. Nothing was done, as usual, just like with the post office, nothing was done until there was a BBC programme about it called Three Girls. And we believe in a national agency so that anyone in the country has a hotline they can call to say, this is happening in my community, we need to be investigated, and someone can go and override the local councillors that are working in that area who are trying to cover it up. We need to deal with this on a national basis and deal with it quickly. Transgender ideologies in school. I mean, basically, two genders exist. We don't subscribe to any of this nonsense. Listen, I do actually know some transgender people who have transitioned, and if they've done it as an adult, that's fine. How we believe in live and let live. How you want to dress up and what you want to do is up to you. But don't take it into our schools, and don't put boys in my daughter's changing room. Okay, I'm not having it. This is not the way things should be done. There should be protected category for women, whether it's sports, changing rooms, toilets, prisons. Women need to be protected, and we cannot have that just being abolished in the name of ideology. So we're very much against that. And on top of that, critical race theory. So for those of you who don't know, that's the idea that you treat different races differently. Obviously, they have all these fanciful ideas about white privilege, which is nonsense. Really, everyone should just be treated equally. That would solve a lot of problems. That's what we believe. Thankfully, it's what is being taught in my children's school. But I do know schools, some private schools in Norwich, I'm not going to name them, who are teaching critical race theory. And a boy I know, I know his father, he got in trouble for challenging this. He got in trouble for saying that you can be racist against white people. Which is shocking, and that's in a private school in Norwich. So this is coming to us, whether we like it or not. We need to fight it. We need to stand up for good old-fashioned British values of fairness. And And if we can do that, we'll go a long way. VAT and school fees, absolute nonsense. I mean, this is not going to raise any money at all. I already personally know of people who've taken their kids out of private school or are in the process of doing it because of this. For some people, it'll be the last straw. That means they just move abroad, and then we lose all of their income tax and every other tax they pay as well. And obviously, it's going to put more pressure on state schools when some of these private schools close, and then all of the kids end up in the state school sector. So we think it's not going to raise any money at all, and it's a well-established protocol that you don't charge VAT on education. I don't know of a single country that does. I think it's disgraceful. We would ban smartphones in school for under 16s. I know my daughter would be furious at that idea, but it is dangerous. We've seen how children need to be able to learn how to interact with each other on a face-to-face basis, because once they go online, it does get very nasty very quickly. And until they've got the confidence and experience of dealing with people to be able to do that, they can't really be on social media until the age of 16. Further education, scrap the interest on student loans, extend the loan repayment period to 45 years, enforce higher standards, stamp out visa fraud. I mean, I don't think it's really happening in Norwich, but I know it's happening in places like University of Westminster, where the university has become a business model for taking in foreign workers who basically apply to be a student. They turn up for classes on the first day, and then they go off and be Uber drivers, and then they're in the system and no one knows where they are, and then that's it. And then they bring over dependents as well, and then we're led to believe that these are Oxford graduates bringing over the best and the brightest. It's just not true. We need to have much stricter vetting of which universities are systematically bringing in foreign students as a business model, and we need to stop students bringing in dependents. I think the vast majority of students do not have dependents. If they're genuinely starting their careers early life, that shouldn't be something that students can do. And then we need to bring back proper apprenticeships. Okay, so STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Those are the industries that are scalable. Those are the industries that are seeing the most innovation right now. If we invest in those and put our young people in apprenticeships, we can create the economy of the future to get the public services that we need. That is where the focus needs to be. Children, marriage and the family. So one of the biggest struggles for many people is the inability to afford childcare, especially when the children are very young, before they reach school age. So our proposal is actually to front load child benefit for those early years before they get the free childcare, and that will make it easier for mums or dads to stay at home in the preschool years, or to pay for childcare, whatever their preference is. We believe in relaxing the nursery regulations. So there's really strict regulations on how many adults you can have per child in this country. In France, it's 8-to-1. Straight away, that would reduce massively the childcare costs. We would support marriage through transferable personal allowance. So again, if a wife wants to stay at home, or a husband, and then the single earner is obviously paying a lot more tax, they can use some of that allowance to reduce their tax bill. And yeah, we've already discussed the other parts of that. Agriculture. So obviously this is a huge industry in Mid Norfolk, and there's going to be a lot of changes. Okay, so what we've seen, the proposals that have come through and are in the pipeline for 2028, is that all of the food subsidies are going to get withdrawn, and they're going to be replaced by climate subsidies, rewilding subsidies, and one subsidy is going to be replaced by about 200. Okay, this is adding huge complexity to the system. This is not, the majority of farmers voted for Brexit. The reason was, for them, mostly, was to reduce the regulations. The Common Agriculture Policy was really burdensome for them, and what they wanted was a simplified regulatory structure, and they've got the exact opposite with this obsession with net zero. We need to get away from it, and we need to go back to self-sufficient in food. We learned this lesson after the Second World War, okay? Who is the second biggest exporter of food in the world? It's actually the Netherlands, believe it or not, and the reason is they spent a huge amount on food production at the Second World War because they were really starving during that period. It's the reason why we had food subsidies in the first place. And right at the moment when we might need those food subsidies, we might need food at home again, we're taking away those food subsidies, and it's going to hurt tenant farmers more than landowners, and it's going to be hugely damaging to Mid Norfolk. So we're very much against that. We do need to invest in innovation and diversification, and there's so much technology now happening in agriculture, it's amazing. I went to Eton College just down the road, and they're doing wonders with what they're teaching the young farmers. We need to see more of that, and farming needs to become something that we promote in our society again, because it is hugely important. We've set a target for 70% food production in the UK. Believe it or not, it's down to 50 now, which I think is hugely dangerous. I think 70% is the absolute minimum it needs to be. If we do, we've already seen what's happened with the Ukraine-Russia war. There was huge dangers of the loss of wheat and barley, and we've seen it with energy. And even if we're not involved in the next war, if there is a flare-up and it spreads, it could very well affect our ability to feed ourselves. So this needs to become a #1 priority, and it would be for me, as well as cutting red tape for farmers. Pensions. So after the question of how you're going to pay for all this, the second most common question I get asked is, what are you going to do for the WASPy women? So for those of you who don't know, the WASPy women are, when there used to be a lower pension age for women than men, and the last government changed it so that they would be equalised, which is fine, but they did it far too short notice, and they didn't communicate the changes enough, and they didn't give women time to plan. Now, these are the women that have brought up this nation, and I believe they should be looked after, and the ones that have suffered, I believe they should be given compensation. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, it's not in our manifesto, it's not in the draft manifesto, it may be in the final version. It's something that I've requested to be put into the final version. I know that it's something that is close to a lot of people's heart. I believe, and I will push for, proper compensation for WASPy women. Going forward, we need to plan much better in this country, and the auto-enrolment that was brought in, which means that people are automatically enrolled into pensions from an early age, is great, but I think it needs to be mandatory. I know too many people who have opted out of that scheme because they don't realise it's their money. They think it's going to somebody else, and I think that needs to be mandatory so we can have proper pension provision in old age, because otherwise our pension system is going to collapse at some point. That's just demographics. So my final thoughts are, I'm sorry if I've bored any of you. I've really tried to go through the manifesto as much as possible and make sure I've covered any of the things that you're interested personally. I did spend more time on things that I'm passionate about, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what you're passionate about. So I'm going to open up the floor now. This presentation is being videoed. Chris is here, our videographer. He's going to be he has been taking the video. So if any of you don't want to be on YouTube, then maybe not ask a question or ask me afterwards, okay? All right, thank you very much. If I can just start, Eric, is there anything that you want to add that you feel that was important to you that I left out? Or?
No, I think that was very comprehensive.
Okay, cool. Has anybody got any questions? Who's going to kick us off? Yeah, okay.
Can you talk a bit about foreign policy, and in particular the Middle East and Ukraine?
Yes, okay. So I am a bit of an isolationist when it comes to foreign policy, okay? I believe that historically, listen, Britain has had a hugely important role in the world, historically, and that is why we have been very often drawn into these conflicts, because either we've been involved with the setting up of Israel-Palestine, or other regions we've been involved. I think that until we can get our economic strength back, which is really teetering at the minute, I think we need to focus much less on foreign conflicts and much more on ourselves. With regards to Ukraine and Russia, and with regards to Israel and Palestine, what I would say is I'm a great believer that the world is not black and white. There are lots of greys in between, and I know that different people have very passionate views on either side of this debate. So I'll start with Russia and Ukraine. Now let me start by saying I know that both of those countries, so if anybody's going to scream at me, I know that both of those countries are two of the most corrupt countries in the world. I know that because every life assurance application that I do with my clients, one of the questions is, have you ever lived in Russia, Thailand, or Ukraine? And that question was on there long before the Ukraine conflict. Okay, so I asked Aviva why that question's there, and they said it's because they are the three most corrupt countries on earth. Okay, so I have no doubt that we are being fed some lies about what's happening. I've no doubt that there's lots of problems and there's lots of waste with the money that we've sent to Ukraine. Nevertheless, I do feel that Putin is the greater danger. I know that some people try and draw an equivalence between our promise to not go for east, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Personally, I think that's a false equivalence. I think what Russia has done, what we did with the expansion of NATO, or what the Americans did with the expansion of NATO, was voluntary. Those countries voluntarily joined us, or voluntarily joined NATO. But what Putin has done is completely different, and he's got form in this. It's not just Ukraine, okay? This is just the latest invasion. He invaded Georgia. He invaded South Ossetia and Aspirations. He invaded Crimea, okay? So this is what he does. He is a despot. Okay, and I do think he needs to be held back, and I think it's right that we took the action that we did, but I'm under no illusions about corruption in Ukraine, so please don't, come up and lecture me about how bad Ukraine is. I know all about it. I'm a very close follower of global conflicts and what goes on in the world, and I know, but I think that on this occasion, the balance is that we should help the Ukrainians fight Putin, because I do think he'll go further. He has made it public that there are 5 regions that he needs to protect geographically in order to be protected from an invasion. So Crimea was one, eastern Ukraine was another, the parts of Georgia he invaded were the third, and the fourth is in Poland. Okay, so if we didn't react, then there's a chance he would believe that Article 5 of NATO wasn't going to stand. And if he believed that, then the whole strength of NATO collapses. So I do think we have to be strong. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
I'm the same as you. I think I was isolationist to begin with, but I think the world moved on, and we have to put a flag in the sand somewhere.
Yeah. No, completely respect that point of view.
The Middle East.
And the Middle East, again, look. I've often, I'm going to be honest with you, I've often been accused of being extremely pro-Israeli, okay, so that's, just studying the history of it, that my heart was always with the Israelis. I always felt that they were trying to create a democratic country in a region of extreme conflict. I think there's, I'm now kind of, obviously seeing what's happening at the minute is hugely distressing for the Palestinian people, and it's awful what's happening to them. However, I still do feel that Hamas are the principal people that are responsible for that. And if we could just, it's easy to say, it's easy for me to say, if we could just get rid of Hamas, then we could all live in peace. How do you do that? How do you achieve that objective? I think as long as their government wants as their primary objective the total annihilation of Israel, which is still their stated objective, I think it's very difficult to deal with that. I always go back to Northern Ireland because it does come up in the hustings that I do. You say, well, how did Northern Ireland get fixed, and what lesson can we learn from that? The thing that people forget is that before any of that Northern Ireland Good Friday negotiations happened, there was an absolute red line on the decommissioning of weapons. Okay, none of that peace process started until we had the ceasefire in '94 and then '96, and then the decommissioning of weapons. Once the decommissioning of weapons started, then the peace process really started to get going. And until the Palestinians are ready to decommission their weapons, Hamas are ready to decommission their weapons, there will never be peace in that land. And so I do feel for the Palestinians. I know I've got family members who know Palestinians personally, and I've met them, and they're lovely people, and I know some have gone abroad and made great lives for themselves. I'm sure they're just as deserving as anyone else. But politics, unfortunately, it means that we have to deal with governments, not the people, the innocent people whose lives are effective, and the government of Hamas, I think, are the principal problem there.
And how much of that is your personal view, and how much of that would be reflected if Nigel Farage
I think from what I've heard, it's not in the manifesto, but from what I've heard from Richard Tice and Nigel Farage, they very much agree with me. You know, they very much agree with me that the world is not black and white. There's grey, lots of greys. We have to deal with it step by step, but they very much come down in the favour, I think, of protecting the people that are trying to live peacefully. Yeah. Do you want the mic?
I would just add that if you think that the Americans electing a Democrat on November is going to solve any of this, it's not. And that's without trying to open up a further discussion, which you'll probably be here all night.
I'm very fascinated with American politics, so I do have to stop myself going down that road because I could talk all day about it. But yeah, I totally agree. We're starting to wake up and realise now that the people that try and pretend that they're all about peace are often not. When we look at their actions, whether it's a Barack Obama or Joe Biden, when you look at their actions in government, it's very different from the rhetoric. It's all peaceful, but what they actually do tends to be hugely supportive of the military-industrial complex, and I think that is a large part of the reason why we are where we are today. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a voice, so this may be a help. I think I agree with almost everything you've said. It's nice to hear, for once, some positive policies and ways of getting to the end of the targets, if you like. I'm very concerned, though, about your promotion of economic growth, because all I can see around in Norfolk, in fact the whole country, is economic growth, which means lots more houses, lots more roads, effectively paving over our lovely green land. And I think you're very optimistic in the oft trotted out mantra that more economic growth means we're going to get more taxes and then we'll be able to afford lots more public services and so forth. Well, this has been happening for 50 years. We've been having economic growth, loads more roads, loads more houses, and yet look where we are with our public services.
Well, I could not have asked for a better question because you've set me up in my passion now. So you're going to have your ear burned off at the end of this. Okay, this is the trick that they've been playing on us. Okay, GDP, right? It's the total amount of money that's spent in the economy. And if everyone is obsessed with that, then you just bring in more and more people and more houses, like you said, and more building of houses adds more GDP, but it doesn't make anyone better off. So what is real economic growth? Real economic growth is the ability to do things more efficiently, okay? If you've got to put a motorway somewhere and you can get there quicker, you save people money, you have economic growth. If you invent a computer that takes up the administration task that could have been done by 10 people is now done by 1, that is economic growth. That is where you do things more efficiently. So really what I'm talking about when I say economic growth is not the government's definition, which is never-ending GDP. It's productivity. It's the amount that each person can do in this country and how much they can contribute to society. And how do we get productivity to improve? Okay, this might sound counterintuitive and I get a lot of pushback when I say this, but automation creates many more jobs than it destroys, okay? You think about the last 10 years and all the automation you've seen. Supermarkets, self-checkouts, travel agents, flight booking a flight, banking apps, okay? Even photography, video, all the different things that we take for granted in life have been made far more efficient and far more productive by technology. And it hasn't sent unemployment soaring. If all that automation was going to kill jobs, unemployment would be 30% right now. Instead, what it does is it puts more money in each and every person's pocket, and the added expenditure from that money creates the growth and more than makes up for someone losing a job in a checkout means they've then got more people to do something else. And that is how we get the economic growth. So you're absolutely right. Building housing, just bringing more people into the country, creating larger GDP solves absolutely nothing. What we've got to do is invest in our young people, invest in training, and invest in automation to get the productivity growth.
Kabeer, what about renovations? We keep building houses everywhere. There's properties that could be renovated. Look at that wine shop in Attleborough. How many years has that just laid empty?
Yeah.
I know you can't do a lot with listed buildings, but I'm not sure what the problem is with that. That's ground that could be built on.
Absolutely.
A couple of houses where
Absolutely. So, again, this is all about the planning system. And again, I'm going to give the Conservatives a small amount of credit for one thing they've done. It's permitted development rights. So we've got a huge transition happening right now where we've had lots of business that was done in the high street is now moving online, and that means many of these high street shops are no longer needed, but they're still needed for residential use. And so we need to see much more permitted development rights where you essentially bypass the planning system and say, okay, here is a shop like the one you mentioned that already exists, and can we just quickly turn that into some terraced housing and flats? And if we can expand the use of permitted development rights, then you will get much more brownfield development, and that is a far better way to create housing quickly, as well as the extra housing that might be needed for people that move here.
That's all right. I'll congratulate you for having a meeting.
Yeah.
You've got to raise your profile by having a poster to them.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I own land on the main roads.
Yeah.
Take my card, ring me up,
Yeah.
and you on that number,
Brilliant.
and you put a poster to it. If not, you'll lose your deposit.
Thank you very much. No, I absolutely agree. I did have board's orders a long time ago. Unfortunately, the order went in as long as the same time as about 650 constituencies. When the order did come, mine were sent to Harwich, and the Harwich guys were sent to me. So yesterday I drove to Harwich, and I've got the boards now in the back of the car, ready to start putting them out today. So, yeah.
Excuse me, sir. You say you have boards on a main road? You have space on a main road?
I can't hear you.
Is your land on a main road?
He want to put up a poster as big as this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I own land on the A47 on the Acle Strait. I've seen hundreds of thousands of people. If we put a great big sign up, face it both ways, it will be seen by countless thousands of people. I own land on the A47. I land on the 1067. I farm in 20 villages, and I'm poor as can be. So we've got to get rid of this bloody Conservative government.
After this, when we're finished.
Well, I'm telling you, they won't support us farmers.
Yeah.
I'm 83, I'm still farming with my son, we're still expanding. I can have 250,000 just to grow wildflowers and weeds. They don't want me to grow food anymore. I farmed and left school at 15, I don't get no old age pension. Nothing like that because my tax taken all away. But we got to see this country go forward. We can't afford to have nearly 20 million people in this country living off us. I'm sorry, but there's far too many people in this country, and they're accumulating every day on them boats, and they aren't contributing anything to our society.
Correct.
We want to sign up saying, take this country back, secure our borders, and look after the British people. Whether you like me or whether you don't,
100%. 100% agree.
To you, obviously, where you're talking about where the land is, that falls into Broadland. Speak to me. I will get you some boards up on your land in the next 10 days.
Well,
Okay,
I'll
that's
just
right.
make a suggestion.
Thank you.
We've got to raise the profile of this gentleman.
Yeah.
We're in a conservative country. I've got to be careful what we say because I'm up before the planning committee for 10 bungalows, and that's conservative control. But I am sick of them bastards. We have got to have a purpose in life. You just can't keep wandering through this, that and the other. I agree with the gentleman who's taken over.
So what
I
are
mean,
they expecting
The Prime Minister, he made a statement saying, you don't have to go to university to get forward. And I said, and read the little bit in it, all you have to do is marry a billionaire's daughter. And you've got to hit him hard, and I mean hit him hard with remarks like that. You've got to go on their attack. And as for the other gentleman who leads the Labour Party, when he came down to Norfolk, he had a freebie at the football and everything. Never mind about levelling up, we're all level. He stayed in the posh Blakeney Hotel, costing over £1,000 a night. I know that for a fact because I have several houses and one of my tenants told me. So you want to dig out the facts, dig out the nasty facts, and fight dirty as hell, and then we might get somewhere a bit better. Everyone's way, so we better go. I don't want to get.
We need a leader who does not say, I prefer Davos to Westminster.
Absolutely. And you know, there's a number of ways of looking at this. You know, a lot of people talk about the World Economic Forum is, you know, a great conspiracy. It's not really a conspiracy because it's open in plain sight. You know what they're doing and what they're talking about with you hear this phrase, one world government, and now when I talk to people I know who are left wing and you bring up one world government, they say, oh no, that's a conspiracy theory. But I was having conversations at university with these people 20 or 30 years ago, and they were telling me they wanted one world government because everything would be better if we just had one world government. Why? Because then you take away all the competition between countries. They can tax you whatever they want because you can't go abroad and escape it. And that's why they want one world government. And it's not a conspiracy, it's in plain sight. This is what they talk about, putting leaders in place in positions in power and launching them to become leaders of those countries. That is their agenda. It's why they all sound exactly the same. So it's not a conspiracy, it's just their strategy. And we need to fight against it. If we believe in freedom and democracy and the nation state, we have to fight tooth and nail.
Conspiracies exist, it's conspiracy theories.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, sorry, Brian.
Two questions, close to home. What's the Reform's opinion on, I think I know the answer, on BBC, and would they address that problem if they see it as a problem?
Yeah.
The second question is, how do you see Reform interfacing with the Bank of England?
Okay, very good question. So, I'll take the first question first because that's the easiest one. So we absolutely do not believe in having a publicly funded BBC that just goes against everything that we believe. You know, it's a tax, it's the most regressive tax in the UK, and the fact that people actually go to prison for not paying it is obscene. There's absolutely no reason why the BBC can't become a streaming service like everyone else, and if they need a little bit of funding for the radios, that's fine, okay, look, but at the end of the day, those over time need to become private as well. Other radio stations manage it. I don't see why we should be asking pensioners or anybody else to pay for a TV service. It made sense 100 years ago or 80 years ago, whenever it was, but you know, now it just makes absolutely no sense. And the fact that it's still there just shows you how entrenched that political establishment are, that they would keep that going because it doesn't affect them. But yeah, with regards to the Bank of England, so very interesting one. I've thought about this a lot. I don't have an answer for you, but what I will give you is my thoughts. Okay, so here's where I am. I'm on the fence. Okay, so why am I on the fence? Because on the one hand, I was taught economics from 1996 to 2004, and during that period is when the Bank of England went independent. And obviously you had the ECB is independent and the Fed in America is independent. So what does that mean, independent? It means that they set the interest rates based on an inflation target that is independent of government, so that governments can't cut interest rates before the election. Okay, so if you look at Turkey, what's happening there, Erdogan has consistently kept interest rates too low for the inflation that they had, and now they've got hyperinflation where inflation is 60, 70, 80%. That's what can happen if you don't have an independent central bank. Okay, so I would veer towards keeping that independence of the central bank. Nevertheless, there does need to be some control, because without any control, then there's no democratic accountability at all. And there is some control. I didn't know until a few years ago that actually Rishi Sunak signed off on the money printing that they did for COVID. Okay, so he had to sign off on that money printing. So there is still some control, and there needs to be control for us if we're going to move to tiered reserves that I talked about earlier and stop paying interest in this QE debt. So I do think that we do need those kind of control mechanisms, but as with regards to interest rate setting and money printing, or QT, which is the opposite of money printing, I think that still needs to be independent, because the danger is that a party in power will cut rates before the election to create the growth, a short sugar rush in the economy before the election, make everyone feel good, and then put it down later. What I learned in economics was that it's not just inflation that's a killer, it's expected inflation. Expected inflation is actually a bigger killer than actual inflation, because it changes your behavior. And the expected inflation rate in the 80s and 90s was about 5%, even though the actual rate was 2.5%. Once we made the Bank of England independent, the expected inflation rate came right back down in line with the actual inflation rate, and that saved us all a lot of money. So yes, still a lot of independence, but we do need to be able to make those tweaks that I suggest. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I remember up in the 60s when there were two interest rates going, one for commercial, one for domestic, and that seemed quite successful, but that seemed to have disappeared in the 70s.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know why that disappeared. It does make sense to tailor the interest rates that way. I would certainly support, supporting strategic industries. As a lot of my presentation was about food security, energy security. I didn't really talk a lot about manufacturing. Manufacturing is hugely important. It's all very well spending 2.5% of GDP on defence. Well, what has it been spent on? If we can't manufacture weapons or tanks or anything else, then all we have is a stockpile, and when that stockpile goes, we've got nothing. The reason that we survived in the Second World War was because a lot of our industry turned over to manufacturing arms for the war, to support the war effort. So we don't have a manufacturing industry, then we can't do that. And the banks at the minute are not supporting manufacturing. The reason they do it in Germany is because they've got much smaller banks. So the smaller banks, they know their neighbourhood, they know their individual companies, and they know them intimately, and they can work with them on their business model. Whereas we have these large banks, and large banks don't like complexity, they don't like complications, they like simplicity. So they love houses, they love anything that's really simple, creative form, and it works across the economy. But as soon as you come to them with an idea that's subjective and requires a decision, then quite often the answer is no. And I think our manufacturing has really suffered because of that, and I think a slightly lower rate available to them would probably be helpful.
Will you keep our steel industry?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. Just going back to everything I've said, absolutely. Steel is so important for it's the building blocks of life, whether it's construction, whether it's cars, whether it's vehicles, weapons, whatever we need that is, apart from food and energy, the third most important thing that we need is steel, in my opinion. Sorry, I know you've wanted to ask a question for a while.
Energy companies had the permission to build pylons across the country to the Norfolk coast.
Yeah, so that's the big controversy at the minute. So this Norwich to Tilbury line I mentioned earlier, the 7.5 billion line, there's huge controversy in that because it's far more expensive to put the cables underground than it is overground. And so I'm not sure how far along they've got. I know because it's not actually coming through my constituency. My colleague Scott Huggins from Waveney is all over this, and I'll check with him if the planning has actually been approved for the pylons. But I know there's a lot of people that are really upset about it, and there's a lot of pushback. So I think if you...
Theresa Coffey started a petition in Parliament to try and get an assessment of the figures that the energy companies had produced, but there's been no publicity about it at all.
Yeah, I haven't heard what Theresa Coffey's done, but I know that there's been a huge campaign against the pylons, and I would support that because it's all because of this wind farm that they're building in Norfolk, and it's just unnecessary in my view. Yeah.
I'll just add something there. I'll just add. The consultation is ongoing, which is a lovely word, is what they use. However, they have dug a whopping great trench right through the middle of Norfolk, which turns left at Swaffham and heads towards the south of Norwich. Now, if you're talking about you're having a consultation to whether or not you should build these pylons, and you're going to send the electricity from the pylons all the way around the Norfolk coast down to Tilbury, this huge great scar is no reason for it to be there. But of course, when it hits Norwich, and it hits Mangreen to be more precise, which is alongside the A47, just off the Harford roundabout, you will see the largest piece of engineering work in progress. There is tens of millions spent now. And the purpose of this, it's because where the underground is converted, changed from the DC, where it comes off the wind turbines, and it is converted into AC, and that's where the pylons go from. Now, if they're talking about having a consultation and not building all these pylons, why are they spending tens of millions of pounds, not just at Norwich, but down at Tilbury? They've already decided what they're going to do. It doesn't really matter what we think, because when the argument will come down, when it will come down to the nut rub, they will say, we spent too much money on the project already, right? So we'll have to have them, right? It's horrendous. If you go to Norwich, if you look on the Norwich bypass, you go to Harford, you should see what they're building up there. I mean, they've even got a huge, what they call the lake, right? Which is to keep this thing cool. They're building themselves their own broad, virtually, full of water up there. It's a massive site, massive big buildings going up. And they've been at it now for well over a year. So, as much as I disagree with putting pylons everywhere, right, I think that we may get lumbered with them regardless, whether we like it or not.
I'm sure we will.
I think that might well be the case, unfortunately.
Was there somebody at the back? Yeah.
You mentioned in your presentation the criminal justice system and the requirement for reform. You didn't expand on that. I'd like to hear how you would go about reforming the criminal justice system, particularly the judiciary. I get incensed when I read about gangs of Romanians fiddling 50 million here, 50 million there. They go to court, they're sent to prison for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It's ridiculous. The sentencing guidelines are ridiculous, and it's time somebody had a go at the judiciary to find out what their game is.
Thank you for that. So, totally agree. I think for me, there's so many layers to that, but I'll just go through them as quickly as I can. So, the root cause. Sorry, I'll just go back. The root cause for most of the issues we're seeing in the criminal justice system is simply the lack of prison places. The lack of prison places is leading the government to give guidance to the courts to reduce sentences, and then even if the judges want to or not, they're basically forced to give shorter sentences because the prisons are full. So we've got to absolutely focus on that as a number one. Before we change a thing, we've got to massively increase the prison places. 10,000 is in the Manifesto, which is fully costed. I believe as soon as we can afford it, we should build a lot more, because I do think there's a huge problem of criminality. This problem, which isn't showing up in the crime figures. I think a lot of people stop reporting lots of types of crime because they're just so fed up of things not being done about it, like car theft and things like that, which is why you can't even get car insurance for a Range Rover in London anymore, because there's so much theft. So that would be the first thing. In terms of overall accountability for the judiciary, completely agree we need accountability for the judiciary. The difficulty I have is how we do this, and again, it's one of these things where I'm not certain of myself. I'm just telling you what I've learned over the years, and I've got a friend, one of my best friends in the world. He's a lawyer in Scotland. He's an advocate. He was a human rights lawyer in Colombia, so he's got loads of useful information for me. And we've discussed this. We discussed this at a wedding a few weeks ago, and it's all about how do you get accountability for judges? Because judges have to be accountable to someone, and at the minute I don't think they are. Without politicising judges, I don't want to go down the road of what they've done in America. What they've done in America is you took complete politicisation of the judiciary, which has led to the ridiculous scenes we've seen in the last few weeks with Trump, which is completely trumped up charges. That's what happens when you get a politicised judiciary. Yeah, excuse the pun. That's what happens when you get a politicised judiciary. So I don't want to see elected judges or elected prosecutors. But there needs to be some accountability, and I think there needs to be a way that we can feed into, almost like a board that is much more critical of judges and much more detailed in their analysis of which judges are performing well and which aren't, and what are the reasons why. And looking at the statistics, you can very quickly see if a judge is too lenient or too harsh in a certain area. The statistics can tell you. And as I was always taught in engineering, you have rumble strips. So in a car, when you're driving down the dual carriageway and you veer off, before you get to the edge, you get that rumble strip that's a warning that tells you you're going off track. Okay, so that's what we need with statistics and with the judges. When we see their statistics veer off, hang on, there's a problem here, this judge is too lenient or he's too biased against a certain demographic or something, then that rumble strip goes off and warns us and says, this needs to be investigated. That's the way. Look, I'm sorry, it's a really boring and technical answer, but it needs to be that kind of detail to fix these problems, because broad brush statements like I could make, like a lot of politicians, aren't going to fix the problem.
And a lot of rape cases don't get to court even, do they?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, a lot of rape cases don't get to court, but for the exact same reason. Yeah, because they don't believe that they can actually get a prosecution. So, I think there needs to be a lot more accountability. And on the other side as well, I think anonymity for all sides as well, because the other side of that problem is I've witnessed 2 people that I know who've been falsely accused of rape and what it did to their reputations in the town, and they've had to leave the town because no one believed that they were innocent. And so there needs to be anonymity on both sides, and then once you've got that anonymity, then absolutely strengthen the prosecution process.
Now, I'd add, you see, we talk about more to prison spaces, but there is another way of looking at it, and it's not reforms policy, but we also send far too many white-collar, non-violent people to prison. Now, what are they actually gaining from going to prison? What we should do is those ones, and I don't want to sound a bit like a sort of 17th century despot, but those people who are suffering, who commit white-collar crime, We shouldn't send them to prison. What we should do is put them in a pink boiler suit, and we should send them into the fields in the fens on a Saturday morning on their days off and tell them to chop cabbages out. Right? You make sure they understand that there isn't nothing good going to come from their exploits. But they're not going to go around and start killing people. These criminals aren't killing people. These people need to be shown that there is a consequence for their crime. Now, when we have people like the drug dealers, we're not strong enough. I mean, we should be clearly saying they need life imprisonment, right? They need life imprisonment, and there's no get out at half time. No, you are there till you rot, because they are destroying thousands of lives, and they need the harshest laws. You can't just, we go about it sometimes in the wrong way. And I think there is a way of looking at justice, but there is a clever way of doing it. Our prisons are full of foreign prisoners, which we're keeping. Well, maybe we should be sending them home and then freeing up our space as well. I don't know. I mean, that's not Reform's policy, but there's also another way of looking at this. We have to think our way through these new problems we are going to face, rather than just blindly going down the same old route of judges letting people off after so many months, but putting them in prison for 10 years and letting them out after 3. That's a waste of time. They're not learned anything apart from learning how to be a criminal. So perhaps we should try something a little bit different as well.
I don't know if I know how to use that. Yeah. Do you think that the utilities should be coming back under public control? Because every time there's a problem with the water industry, I use that particularly because if there's sewage going into the rivers, or if there's a problem, we'll deal with it, but we've got to put the price up. When there's shareholders making a great deal of profit, and yet we're paying for all these improvements. I suppose the same could be said of the energy industry the same.
I think on water, yes, I absolutely agree with you. And Reform Party policy is we'll take 50% public ownership of water, and that is hugely important because they're responsible for sewage. One of the reasons why good builders are being stopped right now is nutrient neutrality rules, where the sewage is seeping into the waterways, and obviously if you've got the Broads you want to maintain that, and that's because our sewers are overflowing. So if we need to fix this urgently. It's not just isolated, this is all over Mid Norfolk, and if the planet does continue to warm up, which it looks like it will, then it will, whether it's human-made or not is irrelevant. If it does, there'll be more flooding, there'll be more overflowing sewage, and there's not nearly enough being invested in sewage treatment works, and the water companies have far too much leakage. Something like 30% of all water leaks, and so it's not worked. There's privatisations which have worked. The water company, I don't think, has worked. So we would take 50% public ownership. With the energy companies, it's difficult because there's 2 types of energy companies. There's the energy company that you use, which is the kind of retail one, like Octopus, and then there's the Shell and BP who are doing the mining. The vast majority of the profits are actually with the mining company. These energy companies there's actually many of them go bust. So in 2022, there was 31 energy companies in the UK went bust because it's hugely risky. They don't make huge profits. It's very fine margins, and if it goes the wrong way, they're out of business. So I think there's lots of competition there, and I think competition is good. Competition is how you make privatisation work. And with the mining industry, anytime that's been nationalised, just look at Venezuela, just look at Iran, just look at Iraq, look at Russia, it absolutely destroys that industry, and we need to mine more. But with water, 100% agree with you, and we need to have part nationalisation of it, take control of the board, and get the investment that we need so that we can all get back to living a more normal life. Sorry.
Just can I
Yeah.
just expand on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
As well, is that I think there should be some sort of, I don't get the words out right, I'm sorry, some sort of accountability, because I think the flooding in Attleborough,
Yeah.
no one could decide whose fault it was and whose priority, whose responsibility it was to clean out this, that and the other. And I think we had the same problem in Sheringham.
Yeah.
When they had the big sinkhole, whose problem is it? The water company, the environment agency or whoever. There should be some sort of accountability. Whose responsibility is for what, if you see what I mean?
Exactly right, and that's why we've put... Thank you for your contributions. You want to grab them then?
Sorry if I didn't have a question.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just on your point there, it's good things that when we're paying for gas and no type of thing, and electric, one thing that really makes me really mad is not only the cost of standing charge. That's on what they haven't said. That's gone up quite a lot. That's almost like a tax that kept very quiet. Oh, your price is going to come down, but your standing charge, which I think is a tax that is going up.
Yeah, and the standing charge, that's where the environmental levies are hidden, is in the standing charge, and that's the hidden tax. So all this Norwich to Tilbury line, all the National Grid, the wind farms, all the subsidies, that's all in that standing charge.
Yeah, so when you try, or you put forward a motion, like a policy to lower that, stop it, scrap it.
Yeah, I mean, if we scrap net zero, which makes no sense because we will not change the weather, as long as Asia and China CO2 is going through the roof, even if the climate alarmists are right, we still won't change the weather going to net zero. So there's absolutely no point. We just focus on clean, reliable, low-cost energy, and then you can get rid of the subsidies and lower those standing charges.
One more thing, sorry.
Yeah.
I think if you ask anyone here, certainly all the people I've talked to in Dereham, dentist, I went to my dentist 2 months ago, whatever. My teeth are really good. I had a dental check, obviously it's private, a dental check which is about 5 minutes, a hygienist which is a quick, that's getting published. I had 2 quick x-rays on each side, 164 quid. I mean, and you hear now people who can't go to the dentist, who pull their teeth out. It's absolutely shocking. I mean, is it going to be a question?
£4,500 bill.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah. Yeah.
I've lost NHS dental after 20 years. They've gone private.
Yeah.
Yeah.
10 weeks notice. We can't find a dentist in Norfolk.
That's right. It's one thing I think that all of us is a problem. Are you going to put through steps or try and enforce that every town has a decent NHS dentist?
Yeah.
Decent fees, because it's absolutely shocking. I know someone, my wife knows someone, who had to pay £15,000.
Yeah.
15,000. My wife just had to pay £900 for quite basic.
Yeah.
And she had to pay tax on life insurance. It's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, it's an absolute scandal, and let's get to the heart of the issue here. Really, what the government is doing is it's saying, well, if we defund dentists, then hopefully people will just sort out themselves and they'll pay for themselves. Well, that's all very well and good, but when you get a shock like you had or like your friend had, and you suddenly get a massive bill, then you weren't prepared to not be able to get access to a dentist. There isn't anything in the manifesto. I'll give you my own personal view. We just need to be upfront with people. Either we can afford it and we can afford to pay NHS dentists properly, in which case let's do it and make sure there's NHS dentists for everyone. Or we can't afford it and we say we only do it for the people on low incomes and everyone else gets some sort of private dental insurance. At least then you would have something in place that should it happen, you then not having to find $4,000 or 15 grand. You've got the insurance in place because you know up front you don't qualify for the assistance. I don't know what's affordable and what's not. I don't have a strong view either way. What I do have a strong view on is just being honest with people and saying, this is what's going to happen going forward. We can't afford this or we can't afford this, and this is the plan, and this is how you plan for your future dental care. It just comes back to trust and honesty at the end of the day. Yep, sorry, I know you've been waiting for a long time. I've been trying to get down to you.
The Royal Mail, apparently, or the Post Office, whoever delivers our letters, is going to be sold to a foreign investor, and we're going to be lumbered with just 3 deliveries a week, so they want to do. That's totally wrong. It should be in British hands, for our people, and we should have a proper service. What's happened to it is disgusting. So hopefully, Reform will do something about it.
Yes, so yeah, there is so many people that depend on the post office for services. One of the reasons the banks have been able to close the branches that they have is because they've handed responsibility to the post office. Having done that, if they then start closing post offices, then people have absolutely no option whatsoever. And yes, those things are moving online, but that's going to take a long time before we're fully there, before we're fully paperless. And there's a lot of people that just aren't, familiar with using apps. And, I did it. I lodged a check last week for the first time using an app. I couldn't believe it. And my wife told me that's about 10 years old. You're 10 years behind the game. So even I'm sort of behind the times with these sort of things. Yeah, we absolutely need post office services. I think if it is going to be sold, that the requirement for deliveries and the requirement for those banking services in the community have to stay. That has to be part of the agreement. The government has the power to do that. I hope they do it. If we're in government, we definitely will do it. It's not something that we can just let go by.
I just found, as I've got older, I can't use my phone. I bank online and everything, but I'm getting less and less good at it.
Yeah, no, that is definitely a problem, and I know a lot of people who've got physical impairments who really struggle with online, and that's another reason why you need those in-person services, because you've got somebody else to help you. So it's another reason why I think those post office services are so important, and that has to be part of any agreement. Was there somebody else down here? Yeah, okay.
Staying with the law and order issue, Rishi Sunak recently announced a scheme to bring back national service, which seemed to go down really well with traditional Tory voters. And part of the argument for that is to instill a sense of social responsibility in young people. I saw Nigel Farage dismissed it as nonsense on the TV.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good idea.
Yeah, so let me get into the detail of that. So the reason Nigel Farage said it was nonsense was because he knew the Tories didn't have a plan for it. And so as a party, yes, we absolutely agree that things like national service, which can bring a purpose to young people, people who've lost their way. If you've not, my personal belief is, if you're not going to university, or you're not going to an apprenticeship, and you're not doing something productive, having left the education system, you should be encouraged or funneled into a national service programme. I think it's hugely beneficial for your young people. The reason Farage said it was nonsense because it wasn't costed, there was no plans, and then they changed it. They said 1 minute it was national service, the next minute it was mandatory, and then it wasn't mandatory, and then it was 30,000 people. 30,000 people, that's a drop in the ocean, and it doesn't really change anything in my view. Sorry, I had a question.
Thank you. I'm taking up what a farmer friend said. Unfortunately, he's left now. I don't agree with him over getting nasty and dirty. I think one aspect that is notable about reform at the moment is their politeness. And I think it was obvious in the seven-way TV debate that whereas Nigel, he did interrupt occasionally, he was generally respectful, whereas Angela Rayner and Penny Morton were fighting like cats in a bag. I think that's just keep the way you are, and I love you, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Should have brought some to sell you. Yeah, listen, my dad always taught me if you're throwing mud, you're losing ground. And I think that is definitely the way I've run my campaign. There have been lots of people, not just this gentleman, who have encouraged me to get more nasty and criticise, but I believe that our policies are good enough to stand on their own 2 feet. And given this moment in history where we are, where there's so much despair, I think people really want some hope and some positivity about your solutions and what you bring, and I don't think point scoring really works. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
What about, we spoke about the national service and so on. What about defence? Are we going to invest in making our country secure? I know the services have come down and down and down. Are we going to build them up or just leave them as they are?
So thanks for asking that question, because I didn't really include it in the presentation. With regards to defence, my belief is the big question is, it's very easy to say, well, we're going to spend 2.5% of GDP. Okay, so what? So is everybody else. What are you going to spend it on? That's the question. How are we going to prepare for the dangers that we're going to face? Are we going to spend it on having a larger army? Are we going to spend it on aircraft carriers, fighter aircraft, missiles? Paddy Morgan wants us to have an Iron Dome system like Israel. I mean, does anyone think there's a need for that? We have limited resources and infinite wants. Okay, so what we spend the money on is crucial. And for me, as I said, come back to what we spoke about earlier, I'm very isolationist. I think that money needs to be spent on being able to show that we can actually defend this land and build resilience in our communities. Okay, one of the good things about things like solar panels is the decentralization of power and the ability to actually get power if the grid gets knocked off. Because I think everybody always has recency bias. When we think about the next war, we think about the last one, and we think, what did we do to fight the last war? And if we do that again, we'll be ready. But the next war is going to be different, and we have no idea what that's going to look like. And I think the first thing we do is focus on the resilience of this nation, food, energy, security, manufacturing, and then expand on that with army personnel. And if we can't even stop the dinghies in the channel, what are we doing sending aircraft carriers around the world? We need to just shore up our base, make sure that we can look after and defend these lands. And once we're in a really strong position and we can do that, then we can start to think a bit more about projecting further if that's what the people want.
Who's going to defend these lands? The young people, now that they're talking about they want to conscript to go out there and fight in foreign fields, that's probably nothing to do with us. We've seen enough wars through the ages, and I don't want to see any more of our young people conscripted. It all sounds very good. They learn this, they learn that. But how many of them would volunteer? People want to join, that's their business, but conscription. Would they send them out? They say not at the moment, but I think they would. And I don't want to see a lot of our young people killed on foreign fields.
And this is the problem. I think 25 years ago, I think there was a lot more people being recruited in the armed forces because there was trust. There was that trust between the government and the people that we will only send you out into battle when we really need it to, right? And once we took that decision to go into Afghanistan and Iraq and start getting involved in all of these wars around the world that have very little to do with us, then people have looked at it and gone, oh, actually, you're not really interested in defending this country, you're more interested in projecting power. That's what you hear they say, we want to project power across the world. Well, maybe that's what you want to do, but most people just want to live a peaceful life. And I think if we can get back that trust, we will. Then if the people trust their government, then it'll be easier to recruit into the armed forces and build up.
They make money out of wars, always have done. You know what they used to say? Old men cause wars and send the young people out to fight.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Tony Blair was an old man, but he was a war criminal and he's now free and living in luxury. And while people like this get away with it, what hope have we got of ministers?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. It is what it is. I'm not going to go over the whole history again, but for me, it was the defining moment for my generation where we realised we couldn't trust the government. And I think for this generation, COVID is that moment.
Sorry, I don't want to take a route, we're going to have to go, but a very quick question. Nigel in the past said he didn't want to become Prime Minister. Has he changed his mind on that? And secondly, will you be able to afford your mortgage on an MP salary?
Oh, right, okay. I'm going to take the second one first. So, I did have a little chuckle. I know I shouldn't throw mud, okay? But I did have a little chuckle when it came out that George's mortgage had tripled, because I instantly knew, based on the figures he reported, that he had an interest-only mortgage. And I think that is hugely irresponsible, given he's got kids. It's not a choice I would make. Yes, I'll be able to afford my mortgage come what may. And despite my wife's best wishes for us to upsize, I have resisted, and I will continue to resist, because I am worried for the financial future of this country. I'm worried what will happen to interest rates, and I do not want to put myself or my family at risk. So you no worries about me affording my mortgage. What was the one? Nigel Farage becoming Prime Minister. I didn't know he said that. I've never heard him say that. I think he'd be a great Prime Minister. I mean, I don't know if you watched the BBC debate, but he came across really ministerial. I had people messaging me who weren't fans of his in the past, saying that he very clearly won the debate. And I completely agreed with him, and I think his time has come. He is hitting his purple patch, as they say in sports. So let's see what happens. Let's be honest, Labour's going to win this election. The question is, who's the opposition? And if we're bigger and have more votes than the Tories, then the next election, a lot of the tactical voting is going to come our way, and I think that could be what propels us to government if all goes to plan.
So you just said there, Labour's going to win this election. Why should they win this election though? Because at the end of the day, in my mind, for the last 60 years, we've had one government after another, not fit for purpose. I haven't seen anything from any of them.
Yeah.
Why is it people go blue to red, what the hell for?
Yeah, I'll tell you why.
They talk about gobbledygook in my mind, about
Yeah.
New York parks here, we're going to get 8,000 doctors and all of the Lib Party. It's all rubbish.
Yeah.
Tell us the truth, and I can listen to you, and I can say, I can hear it, I can believe it.
Yeah.
I don't want to know about fun parks and God knows what, where they're going to build them and all these fancy things, but people do it. And it's like, oh, get that one out, put the other one in, but they're not offering anything.
No.
I've not heard anything from them. I've never played Labour, never will. I've not heard anything. I'll give everyone a fair crack at whip.
Yeah.
I've not heard anything coming out of them that would make me want to vote Labour.
No.
The people out there are like blind sheep.
No.
Take blue, let's have red.
Yeah.
What are you, mad?
They
Yeah.
need to be brave and vote for a different party.
They
They need to get some
You
courage.
get triple parties, they're looking dark like that.
I think the reason they're going to win is there is a lot of people in this country who maybe traditionally vote Labour, and they've not they think it's about personality, okay, and they think that if it's a different type of personality in there, it'll change things. They also think that this is a 1997 moment. It is not, okay. 1997, our debt to GDP was way down to 30%. We were running a surplus where there was tons of money, and boy did they spend it, okay. So they spend it like it was going out of fashion, and they have the benefit of all that financial responsibility, but they're not going to have that this time, and there's a lot of people that don't realise that, and they are going to realise it when things don't change because they're just continuing the same old failed philosophy.
On one side, then everybody else wants to be involved with the other side.
Yeah.
They usually see that, oh, I'm part of the other side. I'm not
Yeah.
part of that anymore. I mean, all this lending the Tories their votes in the last election up the north when they got the red wall turned blue. It was all very well, but they did make it clear that we are lending you our votes, and on one thing, it was a talk basically on immigration.
Yeah.
That was it. They didn't care about straight bananas or anything like that. It was control and immigration. And they didn't do it, and they've ducked it, and here they are now saying, if you vote for us, we'll start the Rwanda plan. Well, you were told this 8 years ago in Brexit. You were told this in the European Union. You were told this 5 years ago when Nigel Farage said, all right, Boris has told me he'll do it, put your votes behind Boris, and they did. What for? He's not even there, is he? He had some cake and he paid for it. You know?
No.
I mean, Tony Blair took us into 2 wars, and as you say, he's living a life of luxury.
Yeah.
But Boris had some cake. He had nothing to do with the Russian war, he could start COVID. As far as I'm concerned, whether he did right or wrong, but my only thought is he had some cake.
Yeah.
How the hell was that getting the witch hunt he got? But at the end of the day, the people just like, go the other way then. Go the other way. Well, you go round in circles on the M25.
Yeah, this is the thing, and if they're being honest, what they would say was what tripped up Boris was not the cake, It was the idea that he thought he could run every single part of our lives, shut down the whole economy, give us all these rules, and that everyone would have to follow them, and that he wouldn't get tripped up himself. And that was the problem. But really, they looked at it from the point of view as, oh, well, he broke the rules because that's just his personality. You know, the answer is government cannot run every part of their lives, and they'll never learn that lesson until they lose power for a very long time. Yeah, I know. It's honestly.
What do you know what the difference was? Well, there is. They were the mayor who also acted as the police and crime commissioner in London, who was the socialist lefty called Khan, and they prosecuted Boris. Up in Darlington, I think it was. They were the police and crime commissioner who was the Labour man, followed by a mayor who was the Labour man, and the council was the Labour man. So basically, Selma didn't get prosecuted.
I think they're all pretty bad.
It's London, unfortunately.
Do you like Nigel Farage? I always like listening to him. At the end of the day, I think he talks straight. And that's what I like.
The problem surely is the one that Farage himself keeps putting his finger on, which is the political class that has let us down, whether they're Labour or Conservative. And also, of course, the civil service themselves. I mean, it is an establishment view about the world, and it doesn't change whichever you vote. I wonder the extent to which, I mean, you've got a mountain to climb in order to get into government. When you're there, I mean, Nigel Farage is very good at insulting bureaucrats like he did in Europe. But, I mean, to change things on the scale that you're talking about against a civil service that, from my own personal experience, will be ranked against you. You know, well, it will be you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And a lot of people bring this up with me. How are you going to deal with the civil service to actually deliver the things that you want to deliver? What we've seen over the last 25 years is the outsourcing of government, okay? They outsourced migration and trade policy to the EU. They outsourced communications to Ofcom, Ofwat. All these different quangos have now appeared for every single part of government. And what they're doing is basically saying, well, we don't have to worry about that decision because Ofcom will take that decision. And really that's why they're not fit for purpose as politicians anymore, because their muscles, their political muscles are so weak from not actually taking any important decisions about anything and outsourcing it to everyone. And that whole thing needs to be torn down. There needs to be an absolute bonfire of the quangos. There's billions and billions of pounds. I mean, just take culture, media and sport, for example. There's like £6 billion a year being spent on quangos in culture, media and sport. I mean, it's just, I mean, yeah.
They're not providing a service, and
They're not.
very civil.
They're not, you know.
Take those two away, they just load of neighbours.
You know, it's just so a lot of toffs in London can have free museums and then talk to their friends about how great it is. You know, well, you know what? If we have to pay £10 for a museum, so what? It's worth it. You know, if you actually value it, it shouldn't be free.
Perhaps we should bring back a guillotine or something.
Yeah, you're going to get me cancelled.
Just come back to the thing on defence. Will a reform keep nuclear weapons, and if you had to use them, would you use them?
Oh, 100% we'll keep them and we'll use them, and we would absolutely never take that threat off the table. Trident is hugely important, so that's got to stay. It's the nuclear deterrent that has kept us safe for a very long time, and a lot of other countries, so absolutely have to keep that.
As you say, I think NATO needs to wake up. I think the threat from Putin is really, really rare. I think which I think he will go through Ukraine, which I hope he does, and his next time will be Poland, Lithuania, Baltic state. And I think NATO's got to be ready for him. And not the only, but yes, build up the armed forces, but have the ultimate thing there, keep the nuclear weapons, say, right, if you start on us, we will use them, and that's the only thing that will, you know, stop you using his. So, yeah,
no, was there somebody else who wanted to have a question?
I mean, you're just talking there about Putin, but then there's nuclear power all over the world now. You've got North Korea.
There is.
They're all having China. It's in the wrong hands.
You're quite right.
No, we'll wait for further dust.
No, you're good. You need to keep them, isn't it?
I know, we've got to keep them.
Yeah.
That's why I keep my ex-wife as a friend.
backing of the party? Is it top Richard Tice and Farage? Who are the other people behind the party sponsoring or?
Yeah, so obviously that's right. So yeah, so each party in the UK is different in how it's set up. Obviously, you've got the Labour, which is much more trade union based, Conservative with their membership, and then Reform UK is at the minute it's a limited company. Now, my expectation is that would change as time goes forward, because I know the reasons they did it, because Paul Oakfold told us, is that they needed to work quickly in order to be ready for the next election, and because of the processes involved, the other route, more traditional route, takes a lot longer. That's why we've been the fastest growing party in history. No, it's a separate company, so it started up, and it's 50% is owned by Nigel Farage, or 53% or something, and then 30-something with Richard Tice, and then there may be some other ones. But, this is a temporary thing. Really, it doesn't, somebody said to me on Facebook, that's not democratic. Well, is Sunak democratic? Nobody, even the members didn't vote for him. So my view is, it's an unusual structure. For me, it doesn't change anything. The only thing it changes is less likely to be a coup, which means that if you do vote for reform and you put in based on a leader, then it's far less likely that we'd be able to, if I was an MP, I wouldn't be able to remove him as Prime Minister, because that structure wouldn't exist in the way it does in the Conservative Party. Yeah, we could change it. We absolutely could change it, and that's up to the leadership what they do. Oh yeah, there's no. As far as I know, I don't think there's law against it. Really, what matters is who the voters put in Parliament, their MPs, and then obviously who the leader of the party is, and those are the things that really matter. And as long as there's that trust, then I think it's actually better than having an election where you vote for Boris Johnson and then you end up with Liz Truss and then you end up with Rishi Sunak, all because of the rules of that party, which wouldn't have happened in Reform because of our rules.
How many MPs are you putting in?
We've got 611 MPs, so we didn't quite get the full amount. There was a little bit of, I'm not going to make any accusations publicly, but let me just say that in the constituency where Gavin Williamson is standing, the candidate for Reform UK withdrew at 4 o'clock on Friday, stating that he believed that we need a Conservative government to keep Labour out. So I don't know if he was offered something. I wouldn't speculate publicly on what he was offered, but we didn't quite get to the full candidate list because of things like that.
It's 625 with the Irish contingent.
That's right, yeah. So traditional unionist voiced in Northern Ireland is now Reform / traditional unionist voiced. So they're officially part, so 625 with them, with 611 without.
Do they have any in?
Do they have any MPs? Traditional unionist voice? No. No, there's so many different unionists. I'm reminded of the Harry Enfield sketch of all the different unionists. So the DUP are the ones that are in, UUP are the ones that used to be in, and the TUV are like a splinter group that are much more pro-union, much more kind of pro-Brexit than the DUP. Any other questions? Kieran, what would you like to know? When can we go home? Okay, if that's everything, then just thank you all so much for coming, taking the time to hear me speak. As I briefly said at the start, the reason I'm doing this is I'm really passionate about the detail and getting into all of the different aspects of these policies, because I think it's through the detail that we can build trust. The slogans look fine for campaign trails, but when it comes to actually winning voters' trust, you've got to go through the detail and explain things to them step by step. It's difficult to do that sometimes on the doorstep. I have had some great conversations on the doorstep, but they quite often lead into obscure things like Jordan Peterson or something else. And so having this opportunity is really great for me to explain where I stand, and obviously hopefully it's been useful for you. Thank you.